I was here in this room, in our bedroom, and it was 3:17 a.m, the early hours of the morning. I was here alone. My husband had gone away on a training course. I was sleeping on that side of the bed, and my young son was sleeping on this side. He was a lot smaller then. And I was woken up by... It was just a strange feeling, really. It was like unseen hands sort of shaking you awake. And I had this urge to get out of bed and go and look out the window. It was like someone was telling me to go and look out the window. Just very strange. I did. I got out of the bed and I walked over to those windows and looked out, and in the distance there were lots of little lights moving around. And I thought at first that they were just stars, you know, moving around in the distance. I remember thinking, you know, wow, they look pretty, and then realising that stars don't do that. I felt myself sort of being lifted up, being pulled upwards. And I was in this light, lots of blue-white light. And then the light dimmed down and I could see sort of shadows moving around in this light. And then the light sort of dimmed down a bit more, and then there standing in front of me were what I would describe as 3 non-human beings. They're about 3.5 to 4 feet tall, brown, tan in colour, and had large oval heads, large oval black eyes, had long skinny arms. They looked like undeveloped children. They moved up and stood in front of me, and one of them stood directly ahead and one on either side. And they had a funny smell to them. I think the most traumatic part really was this taller one had come and stood by my head, and he wasn't holding me, but I felt like he was holding me down. He was leaning across the head of this table and staring into my face. And I couldn't move. It was like all I could do was respond to him looking at me. And one of the other little brown guys came over from the right, and he was holding something that looked like a single strand of fibre optic cable, and it was lit up all along its length. It didn't have a light on it or anything. It was just a light. And the one standing at the head of the table took my head and sort of turned it slightly facing that way. And then I just felt this most tremendous pain, like my head was being sort of split open on the inside. It was just a tremendous pain. And I knew that whatever this was, that this one was carrying, that they'd stuck it into my head. And I felt a sharp pull at the back of my head, like a tug, a sudden tug. And I was laying on, as I say, laying on this table, and I can remember I'm crying, and the tears are running down my nose and sort of dropping onto my lip, and I can taste them. I can taste the salty tears, you know, and it's not the sort of thing, those aren't the things that happen in dreams. Those are the things that happen for real. I have experienced vivid dreams like, you know, everyone else, and they remain with you for a while. In fact, they're extremely vivid. But I have never ever woken up from such a dream or a nightmare with hair missing from the back of my head, a small hole in my navel that was leaking fluid, all the bruises where this, you know, pencil thing had touched me, and this overwhelming sort of memory of smells and sounds. You know, these are real, as I say, sort of this is real sensory input here, and you just don't get that in dreams. You know, this was real. Whatever level of reality it was definitely real.
This is a medical report. It's by a doctor in the Accident and Emergency Centre of West Hill Hospital in Kent. And on it there's a list of injuries, and underneath the list the doctor writes, "I can find no logical cause for these injuries." Maria Ward, this is your medical report.
It is.
What do you say caused these injuries?
Well, that particular occasion, I was awoken early hours of the morning, about 3:15, at my home. There was lots of lights outside the house. I got out of bed and looked out the window, and there was all these lights just sort of moving around. Cutting a long story rather shorter, I ended up outside of the house, and I was moving upward in this light, and I could see the top of the house.
Were you awake or asleep?
I was absolutely totally awake, because at one point I'd walked around the bed and tried to wake my son up, who was asleep in the bed next to me, and I was really slapping him, you know, trying to wake him up. The lights in the house had actually all gone out. The only light was from these lights outside the house. And there I am moving upward, and I'm seeing the top of my house, and I'm seeing the tree in the garden. I saw a tennis ball stuck in the guttering, which we later had removed because I'd seen it that night. I then found myself in, it was a small place, very solid, very real, physically real.
Spaceship?
I don't know, I couldn't tell you. It's not a term I would use. I was in a real place. It was very bright, and when the lights dimmed down, I could see shadows moving around, hear shuffling feet, like children in a gym, like little bare feet sounds. And there, standing in front of me, were what I would describe as 3 non-human beings.
What did they look like?
They were about 3.5 to 4 feet tall, sort of tan brown, grey in colour, very big eyes, long arms, long skinny legs. They looked like undeveloped children. Mm-hmm. And they walked forward, and then I found myself following them around this corridor.
But this is a list of injuries. They hurt you.
Well, later on, as I said, we walked around this corridor, and I ended up in a large room, about 30 foot in diameter. And I was made to lie down on a central table. It was like a platform. And once I was laying down on this table, there were 2 other taller beings. They're exactly the same, but a slightly different colour. They were more of a whitey grey colour. And I had like a sort of probe thing sort of right along my arms and down my body, and where that touched me, you could see right through the skin and see my veins. And after the experience, just an hour later, I had all bruises already fading where this thing had touched me. I had another device stuck into my little finger, and had the nail cut off on the little finger. I had...
They were taking samples of you.
I suspect, I mean, now it seems that way. It seems like some type of medical examination. That's the only thing I can equate it to. I had hair removed from the back of my head. I had a needle placed actually into my head, which caused me a considerable amount of pain.
And these are all the list of injuries. Hair seems to be taken from the root, etc.
Yeah, I had something placed up my nose as well, which I thought when this thing was placed up my nose, it was like a long glass tube. I mean,
How
the injuries
soon
were
after
there.
this experience did you go to the hospital and get
I went
this?
to see my doctor 2 days afterwards, and then he recommended that if the discomforts that I was having, like the pain in my head and what have you, continued, I should go and see a doctor. And as it was, because it was the weekend, I had to go to a casualty unit.
So you went to casualty. Well, we'll come back to this medical certificate and these injuries in a moment. Let me just see how the audience is responding so far. Who believes this? Are we convinced by this? Yes. There's a lot of people here that are. Suppose this lady came up to you, sir, and told you this story. Would you believe it?
No, not at all. But I would actually point to a one-to-one correlation between what she's experienced and religious visions. If you actually look at what people have in religious visions, they are spirited up, they see bright lights. The figure that she described, which is a short one, hairless, broad head, wide eyes, is an absolutely archetypal figure from mythology, from demonology, in fact.
So could it have been the influence of some religious vision or something that you had read about?
I mean, I'm not a fantasy-prone person. I'm not a deeply religious person. I mean, I have beliefs, but they're nothing that take over my life. And as I say, what I experienced was absolutely real to me.
Let me just talk to these 2 ladies, because you too have had some sort of alien encounter, haven't you? Tell us about it.
Very similar, except that we were travelling home along the stretch of road we did regularly.
In a car?
Yes, so there was 3 of us. It was night time, and as we rounded a bend in the road, there was these lights in front of us. Now, the lights were very bright, and you could actually see that the object was round or oval, depending on how you were looking at it.
A spaceship thing?
It was a UFO. We had never seen anything like it before. There was 4 very bright white lights, 1 at each compass point, and 2 red lights in the centre. And it was
round?
Yeah, well, round, oval, as I said. If you're looking at it from an angle, it's difficult to say whether it's round or oval. But it was definitely that shape.
You saw the thing at the same time?
Yes, all 3 of us saw the same thing. Yeah.
You hadn't been drinking? Or?
No.
No? You've never seen this sort of thing before?
Never. No.
Did anything get out of it or talk to you?
No, the car, Vivian, who was driving, tried to speed away from it because we were absolutely terrified.
Yes.
But very excited as well, but absolutely terrified. She put her foot on the accelerator and the car lost power. At which point the object was then in a field next to us, and Valerie and myself were watching it out of the side window. We have no recollection of it going from A to B. from being in the road in front of us to being in the field next to us.
It just sort of zapped there.
Well, all we remember, that was our conscious memory, is seeing the lights, then following it down the road, very, as I said, Vivian desperately trying to get the car to respond to her. And then some way down the road, the lights dimmed as if it was taking a surge of power, and it had gone, and at which point the car picked up speed.
And you thought to yourself, who can we possibly tell?
Well, that's right. Because there was three of us, if there'd only been one, I would never have said anything at all, personally. But because there was three of us, then we felt.
And do people believe you?
Some.
Some.
We take a lot of ridicule, but you get used to it.
Now think how bad it would be if you were a policeman. We have in our studio a policeman who had a not dissimilar experience, didn't you? So you're not a policeman anymore.
No, I'm retired now. I've listened to the lady, I've listened to this young lady here. My experience was that approximately in 1980, I, with other police officers, came across a UFO actually down on the ground, actually blocking the main road.
Anything like you've heard described?
Mine was about 20 feet wide, about 14 feet high. It was diamond-shaped.
Red lights?
There was no lights on it. It was just rotating in the middle of the road.
Did it zap anywhere?
No, the trees at the side were shaking violently, as was the bushes. Now, this was real. This was a real thing. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't lights in the sky. This was solid nuts and bolts. I put the blue beacon on, the flashing warning light. They reflected off it. It was real. It was solid. It left debris on the road. I don't know what it was, and up to this day, nobody's explained to me exactly what it was.
Did you see any aliens of any kind?
No, not consciously, no. At the time, I didn't see anything other than the object.
Right.
Approximately 12 months later, I went under hypnotic regression because there was a time lapse. And during under hypnosis, I do come out with a very similar story to this young lady here.
Right, now we better explain hypnotic regression. That's when you get hypnotized, go into a trance, and remember things your mind has otherwise blocked. Is that right?
Well, that's what I'm led to believe it does, yes.
And what did you remember?
I've seen the videotapes of me under hypnosis, and they're very frightening for me to watch them.
Why?
Because I come out with a story that I find very difficult to believe.
You can't believe yourself when you hear yourself
I find
telling
it very difficult to believe that I'm actually saying what I'm saying, that I get taken aboard the craft, I get medically examined by little creatures that she's described, by the tall guy. I had burn marks on my foot. And it's very difficult to accept something like that.
And this you only remembered under hypnosis?
I can only remember it under hypnotic regression, yeah. I have no conscious memory even today of it. The only reason I can tell you about it is because I've seen myself say it on videotape.
Well, let me just ask Dr. James Thompson, how can one explain this sort of hypnotic memory of such events?
Well, first of all, there's no evidence that under hypnosis you can remember things which you can't remember in other ways. There's nothing which you can get from hypnosis you can't get from other techniques. And that's a very important finding. The one thing that also shows up from hypnotic techniques is you get more bad data, more confused data. So as a technique for getting people to remember things, it's one of the worst techniques available.
Maria, were you regressed?
I've never had hypnotic regression simply because for the skeptics, regression is a controversial area. And I've tried to remain objective about my own experience, and to date, I haven't found anyone that I would consider objective enough in order to hypnotise me, let's say, to find the missing blank spots of other experiences I've had since that one.
Were you hypnotised?
Yes, we were, because we'd lost time. The journey actually took longer than it should have done.
And what did you remember or think you remember under hypnosis?
Very similar to what Maria said. I remember the shuffling feet under hypnosis. That was a big thing. Similar things to she's described, the 3 to 4 foot things that weren't actually humanoid or anything like that, more like robots.
Taking bits of you?
No, Vivian actually claims to have been examined under hypnosis. We had a different experience.
So they just shuffled around and then left you alone?
They looked at us, they took us into a room where we were put into some sort of machine. But this is all under hypnosis. This is what we've learned under hypnosis.
I'm afraid, I mean...
It doesn't, I mean, even like the same as Alan Godfrey's just said, it's difficult for us to believe, so we don't expect other people to believe it because it's, you know, it's something that you just think, you know, this actually happened.
Now, Harry Harris, you've made a study of this,
Yes.
of these stories.
In
in fact,
yes.
you've made a study of this sort of regression.
Yes, I in fact arranged the hypnotic regression experiments of Rosemary and Valerie and Alan and several other people in this room. When we have the people hypnotised, they are regressed back to events prior to the sighting. Under hypnosis, their accounts under hypnosis are the same. They don't vary, but they fill in under hypnosis the missing time. Now, it's the only tool we had available. Without using hypnosis, this data, this part of the experience would not have come to light. We wouldn't be having this conversation, this program tonight. You see, the problem is, no disrespect to my friend here, he's being asked to comment on experiments that he wasn't present at, about people whom he's never met. I'm probably closer to it than anybody else in this room, apart from the witnesses themselves.
What do you say to this?
Let's just go to simple facts about whether you can do memory experiments and whether you can show that under hypnosis people remember things they couldn't otherwise remember, and there's simply no evidence of that.
Now, Mel Grant, you've hypnotised people, is that right?
That's true, yes.
Now, what do you think about all this?
Well, listening to the doctor, I suspect he doesn't know really what he's talking about, as far as it is concerned. Over the years, I've met numerous people who have been abducted. There's a methodology to it.
So you believe this?
Oh, yes, by all means. I've regressed many people with the stories.
But now, Mel, let me just ask you a question. All these people who are regressed and abducted, do they have the same sort of shuffling feet and people with skinny legs?
The basic elements of an abduction are always the same.
Yes.
What happens is that I do this to get to the facts. I'm not interested in truth, because truth can be bent. Facts are different. Let me explain it. If you and I were standing out on a corner and we witnessed a vehicle accident, the police come to you and say, make a statement, Esther. Your statement would be your truth, my statement would be my truth. The more statements you get, the closer you get to the facts.
Oh, I understand you, so that the truth of the people here may be seen through their own eyes, but you're trying to get
perception.
What they have in common.
Yes.
I understand.
So I'm afraid our friend over there, who's probably never seen an abduction victim, does not know what he's talking about.
Dr. Thompson, have you ever...
I've never seen someone who's been abducted or claimed to be abducted. Every single phenomenon which you get under hypnosis, you can reproduce by giving a medical student £20.
How can you argue with that, Esther? There's people here who are suffering, and we have people like our doctor friend over there who's ignoring the evidence.
Does that convince you?
What is the point of us making it up? Our experience was 14 years ago. Would we really have gone through 14 years of being ridiculed by several people, newspapers, all types of people? Would we put ourselves through that if we didn't have something?
It certainly sounds a bit arduous going through it all. I tell you what, Maria, I said we'd come back to your medical certificate, these injuries, because let's face it, this is the nearest that we've got to independent corroboration of your experience, isn't it? So what we did was we telephoned the hospital that's named at the top of this form to ask them about this form. Now, very sadly, they said there were some errors in this form. They said that, for example, there was no date stamp on it, and there's a special hospital stamp that they use. They said there should have been an admission time stamp on it, and there isn't one. They said there should be a time stamp for the time that you were discharged. They said that this signature doesn't actually conform to any doctor's signature who was there at the time that this happened to you. And
excuse me,
it's
not a fake.
But what
all
they
I
also
can tell you
said,
is it was given. I was given a written letter to take to my GP, which I took to my GP, and then afterwards, when I was asked to do a television thing, which I did sort of anonymously, I asked my GP to fax me a copy of the later report that he received. And he sent me a faxed copy, and then I went down and he did a photocopy, and that is what he gave me.
Well, the worst thing, I'm afraid, Maria, is that no doctor ever types a report like this.
Well, all I can say is that that's what was given to me by my general practitioner.
They're always written by hand, do you see? Because doctors in casualty or these departments don't have
time.
Access to typewriters.
Well, I just assumed that because I'd asked my doctor to get a report from the hospital of what was done, because I took him down a brown envelope with a handwritten.
Yes.
And that was what he actually gave me.
And your doctor is where?
My doctor is in Dartford, but he unfortunately had a heart attack.
So he's passed away.
No, so I'm sure if I went through my medical records, we could find. I mean, quite honestly, I mean, if I'm I mean, would I go on live TV or TV in general with a fake medical report? You know, I asked my doctor to give me, excuse me.
What do you think about this?
I went to my doctor's and he gave me a copy of the report.
Yes.
What really baffles me is that out of the whole size of the whole planet, they come straight to your house.
No, not just me, to many hundreds of people.
No, I mean, in your, I mean, exactly where do you live? In a house in a village or in a city or a town?
Just
where?
in a town, a normal house in a normal town.
Exactly. So the words are just flying across, and they said, "Oh, we'll go down there." Oh, wonderful. Let's all go down there, shall we? All go down there, shall we?
Sir?
Esther.
What a load of rubbish.
Esther, there is
Yes. Madam.
There's two things I want to say. When I was at school, I was told what man can think of, man can do. And years and years and years ago, man used to think they can fly. Today we can. Years and years and years ago, man used to say, oh, we'll reach to the moon. Today we can. Now, I want to say to people, how is it that we human beings on this earth are making these fantastic space rockets, going to different planets, and yet we do believe that we're so intelligent that nobody else out there is so intelligent they want to come here?
Now that's actually a very good point. One of the most famous and respected scientists who's taken a great interest in alien encounters is in fact the author of 2001, A Space Odyssey. That's Arthur C. Clarke. He lives right now in Sri Lanka, but he's going to join us today from his home there. Dr. Clarke, do you believe in the existence of aliens?
Yes, in fact, I've been interested in this for most of my life. I'm fairly sure that there's much life out in space and probably a great deal of intelligent life. And this is one of the great, mysteries. And why haven't they come here before? We've started to go into space, so why has no one ever visited us?
Have you any mental image of what they look like?
No, because, and they could be anything. Life on this planet is evolved in many different shapes, and real aliens would be as strange to us as the giant squid, the giraffe, the sperm whale, and they wouldn't be in any way humanoid. And this is one reason, incidentally, why I don't take any of these reports of meeting with aliens seriously, because they're always humans.
So you think that actually, if a human met an alien, they wouldn't recognize anything familiar in them?
In fact, I have on the monitor behind me, if you can see it, an impression of what an alien might be like. A space artist has tried to give some idea of an alien entity. I don't know if you can focus on that, but it would be as strange as that. We wouldn't even know what it was, couldn't understand it.
Well, if there is life, if there is alien life out there somewhere in the universe, do you think they would take an interest in humans on Earth?
Well, there again, there's so many possibilities. There may be hundreds of thousands or even millions of inhabited worlds with different life forms, different intelligence. So, judging by the sample we have on this Earth, and admittedly one is not very good, a very good sample, there must be, you'd think, other creatures who are curious, inquisitive about the universe, just as we are, and would start to explore it. Probably they wouldn't go in person. It's more likely they would send robot probes, which of course can travel for millions of years without getting tired.
And is there any evidence of such robot probes? Has anybody found anything like that?
No, but this has been seriously proposed. In fact, that was one of the themes of 2001, the idea that there might, in the remote past, have been visitors who've left monitors, sort of watchmen, to watch over the Earth, and one day we may find them. And this has been taken up quite seriously. Perhaps somewhere out in the solar system, on the moon, on Mars, or in orbit around the sun, there may be monitors waiting for us to come out of the kindergarten, and then perhaps their creators may say, hi, here we are.
Fascinating thought. Thank you for the moment, Dr. Clarke. So he believes in alien life, but he doesn't believe in this sort of alien encounter. What do you say to that, ma'am?
Well, I believe it, obviously, because I've experienced it. I woke up in the early hours of the morning and found myself floating in a motel room, above the bed, to the side of it, and then up out of the room.
In a motel room?
Yes, in America.
Fine.
It wasn't an out-of-body experience. I saw the bed and my body wasn't in it. I was physically floating away from the bed. I then found myself lying on what felt like a metal sheet, surrounded by lots of bright lights and lots of entities or beings that were not familiar to me. the feeling I got from them was very warm and very caring and very indulgent.
So you enjoyed it? You weren't frightened?
I wasn't frightened, no. On that occasion, I wasn't frightened.
And what do you think all that was? A hallucination, a dream?
No, I believe it was real.
Why?
Because I didn't know what the beings looked like. I'd heard about the term alien abductions, but I didn't know what they looked like. And then when I had that experience, I described them to other people, and the description matched.
I would like to ask Arthur C. Clarke, what might be some of the psychological explanations for the encounters that we hear about?
Yes, this is a very interesting question. Why are so many people claiming to have seen UFOs or encountered aliens? I think it's part of the psychopathology of our time, sort of maybe the fin de siècle phenomenon. You know, in earlier ages, people saw angels. There were times when there were, thousands of people swore they saw angels or witches. We've been through various phases in the past, but it is now spaceship time. And of course, there have been so many films, TV programs, you can often identify the source of some of these delusions. You can even recognize the spaceships and the aliens from, say, classic films like The Day the Earth Stood Still.
But they're not very angelic these days, are they? They mess about with us a bit.
Well, that again is a projection or interferes. Aliens, until fairly recently, I guess H.G. Wells started it. When the aliens came here, they wanted to conquer us or even eat us. They were hostile. But then Spielberg, others made friendly aliens like E.T. So there's been a sort of oscillation between the two.
And now, I mean, the ones we have heard about in the studio seem to be rather sort of primitive in what they're doing. There doesn't seem to be any vision in what they're doing. Is that just a reflection of our minds having lost some of our own vision?
Yes, I mean, any account of an alien abduction or encounter will depend on the psychology of the person concerned. You'd have to analyze, their background and find out why they had this particular delusion. I mean, that's a job for the psychologists.
Isn't it dangerous, though, to discredit all of them and disbelieve all of them? We just might be throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
It's so improbable that I don't give it a moment's thought. But remember, too, that there are radar networks, optical networks scanning the sky. They've been doing this for years now because of the danger of missile attacks. Anything that came to Earth, it would be detected very, very quickly.
Right, thank you very much indeed.
I know of pilots who have been ordered to shoot them down.
Harry Harris?
Yes, I've met a number of pilots who were scrambled and ordered to shoot UFOs down, to fire on them. One in fact, is an American professor of industrial engineering at Florida International University.
But you've heard what Arthur C. Clarke says.
Well, I think, with respect to Arthur C. Clarke, he could be wrong. Now, he's clearly not aware, he can't be aware, of the radar visual sightings. There were some in Belgium. I have personally interviewed a Professor Schweitzer regarding his research on a Belgian sighting in 1990, multi-radar visual.
Would you have this sort of explanation?
This planet has been contacted by the superior, we would call them the cosmic masters in the Ethereal Society. They have been contacting this planet right the way throughout our recorded history.
Are you saying these people with skinny legs?
They have been accounted for in all of our religious works.
Is
We're
that a
talking
cosmic
about
master?
Jesus, Buddha, Sri Krishna, I Ching, Confucius. They're all cosmic masters who have come to this planet.
Well, let me put that to Arthur C. Clarke. Do you believe that?
Well, that, of course, was the idea behind 2001. I don't intend that to be taken seriously, but the theme of the movie was the interaction of aliens in the remote past, turning us, in a sense, from the man-apes at the beginning of the film into the ape men later on. It's possible, but I think rather unlikely.
So you don't think the pyramids have been placed there by aliens centuries and centuries ago?
What utter nonsense. We know exactly how the pyramids were built. We know who built them. We know the name of the architects. And what utter raving rubbish. Why do people think that we're so stupid?
It's very sad because in 2001, it's such a marvellous, persuasive sort of myth for us to hang on to. It's a pity for us to have to dump it.
Well, in a way, I'm sorry I've created that myth because perhaps too many people have taken it seriously.
Anne Baring, what do you say to that?
I think we're a very rational culture, not given to visions, or at least not given to accepting them. So it seems to me this is the only acceptable form of vision that we allow ourselves. And the audience here is very much divided. Half the audience wants to believe or does believe, and the other half categorically doesn't want to and says it's rubbish, so to speak. I would feel as a Jungian that there's a split in the culture between our rational conscious self and our instinctual selves, which we know absolutely nothing whatsoever about. And we have no God image at the moment. So where do we find God now? We find angels and we find the gods in this UFO situation.
So it's the same that humanity has been doing since time began?
Since time began. We need this. We all need something to...
We're creating our own myths?
Yeah, we're creating a myth. But the myth is part of the evolution of our own consciousness. We need the myth in order to evolve. So it's not something rubbishy. It's vitally important that we understand what the myth is saying to us.
Yeah, I'd like to make one other comment. I hope that in my lifetime we may receive some signal which indicates that there is something out there. That seems the only likely way we will discover the existence of alien intelligence.
What would that mean to you?
Well, it would indicate that intelligence is not unique. It would also indicate that intelligence has some survival value. When you look at the evening TV news, you can't help wondering about that sometimes.
Well, let's hope in your lifetime we do have some sort of evidence, because, as you say, for everybody, I think, on Earth, it would be the most exciting and extraordinary discovery. Thank you very much indeed, Arthur C. Clarke in Sri Lanka.
Thank you. I've enjoyed talking to you.
I'm afraid that is all we have time for. Thank you so much for sharing all your experiences with us. Thank you, a special thank you to Arthur C. Clarke for joining us from Sri Lanka. Thank you for joining us at home or wherever else you are watching us from. Till next time, goodbye.
Maria, 3 o'clock one morning, you woke up and you saw a flash of light on the wall. What happened next?
Next, I can remember floating through the front door and moving upwards and actually seeing a tree in the front garden and the rooftop to my house. I can then remember arriving in a room that had like a platform table in the center and being made to lay on this table. And I had various medical things done to me at that time. I had something placed actually into my head behind my ear that caused me a great deal of pain. I also had something placed up my nose, and at that point I thought I was going to die, but I didn't. I had various sort of needle things poked into me, and I was prodded.
By the aliens were doing all this?
By these little beings, yes. Little 3.5 feet tall beings, tan grey in colour, with very big eyes, big heads. And then later on there was a larger being, about 5 feet tall, slightly different colour, that came up and kept staring into my face and was showing me all these images and things. And I had something actually at one point moving around inside of my stomach, and at that point I can remember just feeling as though I wanted to die.
This happened a couple of years ago.
That's right.
Is it difficult for you to talk about now?
It's still difficult because I'm still frightened, and the only reason I talk about it at all is because there are other people who maybe are not as lucky as myself and have as much support as I have had, and they still live in fear and isolation.
And what happened when you woke up?
When I woke up, I discovered several things were very wrong. I had blood around my nose, there was blood on the bed, there was blood on my nightdress. I had a small hole to the side of my navel, and I had a funny coloured sort of stain there. I had hair missing from the back of my head and a funny little imprint on my finger, and I had several bruises. Generally, I felt very, very ill and sick. And
Rowan, you say you were in a motel room when you were abducted.
Yeah.
What happened?
I'd been having a lot of stress about aliens, couldn't sleep at night, and they talked to me before I went to sleep and told me they were going to leave me alone because I couldn't handle it. Then I woke up in the middle of the night to find myself floating above the bed, and it felt as though somebody had hold of my elbow and was guiding me across the room and up. Then I found myself lying on what felt like a metal sheet, and there were beings all around me. One that I remember particularly was at the foot of the table or sheet that I was lying on, and there were bright lights, and I was blinking because they hurt and saying, "Who put the lights on? Who put the lights on?" And this one being was just staring down at me with sort of grey skin and very, very big dark eyes.
So did your aliens look like Maria's aliens then?
They're saying of a similar type, yes.
Mm-hmm. And then what happened?
Then I just remember floating back in the room and landing on the bed, the actual landing on the bed, and I thought to myself, they lied. And then I went to sleep.
Fred Talbot, do you believe these stories?
No, quite simply I don't. I am an amateur astronomer. I've looked into the sky. I've seen nothing like this. Both your stories are slightly different. You say that they're different size. You said they're the same, but have two different heights. I think it's fantasizing. I don't think you're lying. I'm not going to say that.
I don't know how tall they were because I was lying down. I don't know how high off the ground I was. I was on a metal sheet. It could have been that high off the ground. It could have been that high off the ground. I don't know.
Maria, isn't this really down to a very vivid imagination?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. A dream or a fantasy or a vivid imagination does not leave you with the impression of smells, with injuries, with psychological trauma following
it. An intense dream can. You
no,
can get all
no,
those
no,
in
no,
an
no.
intense dream.
Everyone here has experienced very vivid nightmares that causes cold sweats.
Yes.
By the end of the day, you've generally forgotten about it.
I had a nightmare some weeks ago, and actually an interesting thing as well. I went and scratched myself. There was blood on the pillow.
Fine. So
no aliens came to see me.
So you are saying that physical injuries that I received
when
and
you say
other
a hole near
things...
your navel, what are we talking about? A pinprick or a hole?
No, it was a hole.
Can I just come into the...
John Chesney, you're a psychologist. What do you make of these stories?
Well, we can't know for certain, David, what the actual answer is, but what we can say is that there are a whole range of possible explanations, of course including that you were abducted by aliens. It's possible.
They believe them.
They do indeed, and I don't want to knock their belief, but let's look at other possibilities. We know that at times of major change, such as puberty and later on in life, people often have the experience of floating up above the bed and floating out of the room and going off elsewhere. Astral projection, it's called by many people, but that's quite a common phenomena. There are other ways of thinking about this sort of experience, including the fact that people often in times of trauma blank out. Now, what I'm interested in is not whether aliens exist, but actually whether aliens are to do with this particular experience here. And what seems to me is that there were some very unpleasant things going on for you at that time, with other possible ways of explaining that, such as you were maybe attacked, or maybe some very unpleasant things happened inside here.
Maria, what actual proof do you have that this happened?
Quite apart from a medical report by a doctor, I visited a local casualty unit because my state of trauma was so severe. And I was very frightened because I was bleeding and I thought there was something very seriously wrong with me. Now, I'm an intelligent woman. I'm a very logical woman. And I went along to the hospital, not really for them to tell me that the experience was real, because at that point I couldn't remember all of it, but basically just to reassure me in some way, because I was suffering great trauma.
Why would aliens be wanting to examine you?
I have absolutely no idea.
And what was left inside? You say all these probes, were these detected in the medical test?
Well, you see, your theory is fine, sir, except for one particular thing that hasn't been mentioned, and that is that I myself have been having experiences ever since I was a child.
And I'm not fantasise since they were children.
No, I'm not. I don't have a fantasy.
But what evidence did they find? You went to a doctor. What evidence did the doctor find?
He found damage to my cervix, bruising, hit the hole in the navel he couldn't explain.
How large was this hole?
It was about the size of a small pencil having been inserted.
And how deep was the insert?
I'm not sure how deep.
But the mind is a very, very powerful thing. I've worked with people in the health service who are convinced that they've had spiders as big as me walking around their bedroom, and they've seen leftover signs of that as far as they're concerned. I've seen people who have stigmata, who have a very strong faith, and they actually have blood coming out of their hands in the way that Christ might have done. The mind is very, very powerful. And I don't want to knock you, and you obviously are a very bright person, but of course there are other possibilities for what happened to you.
Tony Dodd, former police sergeant. Are these ladies' stories typical of the kind of stories that you've investigated?
Yes, they are. I've dealt with dozens and dozens of these types of cases, and I would like to say from the outset, I think these women who do suffer the ridicule they do are very, very brave, because they're the tip of the iceberg. No, I didn't mean by you, believe me, I'm talking about by the general public when these things are spoken about. These women are the tip of the iceberg. I have many, many case files where people have been subject to this abduction, or I say abduction scenario.
Who's abducting them?
Who's abducting? There is a repeated description given of a same kind of entity. Now, it doesn't matter what country they're from, what race or what religion they are. When people are having this experience and they are put under regressive hypnosis, they're all saying the same thing.
Right. Where are they coming from?
What do you mean where they're
Well,
coming
the
from?
aliens.
We don't know this. This is what we're... All we know is a situation has developed where things are occurring, not with just females, but males as well, but the higher percentage is
It
females.
is females the highest percentage.
Yes,
isn't
they
it?
are. They are.
But the similarity, I'm afraid, isn't really a very good argument, because the similarity about floating above the bed is very true for many, many people. If you
Sure.
ask teenagers,
I'm talking
they have
about
the same
physical-
experience.
physical.
But they haven't actually floated above their bed, they've laid in bed all night.
Tony,
Their experiences they have done.
Why, if these are happening, these cases you're talking about, and in particular a case like Maria's, why isn't our government here paying attention or treating these stories seriously?
Our government knows all about these things and what is going on.
How do you know that?
There are many reasons I can't talk about here tonight, but
Everyone says that. Like,
yes, they do.
Go on,
I
you'll
agree.
feed out now the D-notice one, won't
Could
you?
I just go through this with this
Okay.
gentleman here? First of all, the psychiatrist. I don't know whether you know or not, but the American psychologists who've been studying, so they do actually have trauma clinics for this, you're probably aware of, in the States, have just announced recently, in the last few weeks, that this thing that women seem to be undergoing is now recognised as a physical thing. It is happening to them. At first they thought
I'm
it was...
convinced that they are dramatically stressed by what's happened to them and by their experience.
Yeah.
What I'm not convinced about yet is the origin of their experience.
Sure.
Isn't it true to say, though, there is a syndrome for everything in America?
Yeah, okay, if we eliminate the Americans, let's go to any other country in the world. They're getting the same thing. It doesn't matter what country you go to. Also, we're also getting people with severe burns as a result of these things. There was an article in last Sunday's paper about this particular subject, and a telephone number of mine was put on there. I've had 300 calls over that telephone. I've had soldiers who were abducted in the middle of exercises on Salisbury Plain. I've had security officers who've been badly burnt by UFOs and have been warned they must not speak about it.
Are you saying the same group of aliens from somewhere in the universe are coming to Earth?
I am saying that there is something not just coming here, and we don't understand the nature of what we're dealing with. That's the problem, what this thing is.
Robin Scadgel, isn't it about time we took these cases seriously if there are now so many of them, according to Tony?
I'm an amateur astronomer like Fred, and I can only look at it from the point of view of what makes sense to me. Now, does it make sense that aliens from thousands of light years away, perhaps, who have got the technology to get here, can then start playing around with people in this way? Is that at all feasible? I think there are much more likely explanations based in everybody's makeup, in human nature and in the mind. It doesn't make any sense to me, and there are much more likely explanations. I'm not saying that the people don't believe what's happened to them. It's quite clearly true, and as Tony has said, there are lots of people who might believe this, but logically it doesn't make any sense to me that people are coming from vast distances and then doing very anthropomorphic things like probing around and sticking pins into people.
Well, we've
Doesn't
done
make
our
any sense
own
at all.
probing because it wouldn't be Central Weekend if we didn't put these claims to a lie detector test. Now, earlier this evening, Maria and Rowan agreed to take a lie detector test, and Britain's leading lie detector expert, Jeremy Barrett, performed the tests on each of them separately.
Were the creatures definitely not human beings?
Yes.
Were you taken from a motel room one night whilst on holiday in America?
Yes.
Did these creatures return you to your bed?
Yes.
Did you meet that night 4 creatures who were not human beings?
Yes.
Did these creatures examine your body internally and externally against your will?
Yes.
Jeremy Barrett, are they telling the truth?
They are. Yep. What really, really annoys me, you even started this evening saying raped by aliens. Neither of them have ever claimed to have been raped.
According to newspaper reports.
No, they're
In quotes.
journalists. Journalists. Crud journalists who say raped. They were examined. They did have things inserted into their nostrils, ears, and so on and so forth. No sexual implications. Sex sells newspapers. There's been no sexual implications at all.
But
no
submitting to a
enjoyment.
medical examination in this way, some people could define as rape in a way as well. That they've had the examination without their consent.
Right, but from what both these ladies have told me, they were being examined. Something, somewhere, somebody is interested in, not just them, but in humans. They're telling the truth. They're sincere. They're not nutters. I have tested several people who have experience, and they all suffer ridicule. They're very brave to come forward and say what's happened to them. But I can almost guarantee that when people start taking this a bit more seriously, like hopefully tonight, because nobody's laughed yet, thank God, a lot of people will have the guts to then say, actually, it happened to me too. That's what's happened to people in the States. The gentleman's saying, you know, where can they come from? I look down my telescope, I can't see them. Just a few years ago, we would not have believed that a man could walk on the moon. We would not have believed what computers can do these days. We just know such a tiny microcosm of what's happening in the universe.
Fred, will you take them seriously now, then? You're hearing Jeremy Barrett?
No, I want he's got the most closed
No,
mind
I have not
because
got
he's a
closed mind.
scientist.
What I will say is, if these people are capable of visiting Earth, they're obviously far advanced of us. Would you agree with that? If they are
I don't even know that they exist.
Right.
All I'm
If they
saying
do
is there is
exist-
a possibility that
If they
they can
do exist and are
exist
capable
if you
of
have an open enough mind rather than the scientific mind. If
Not
I can't
closed.
put it in a laboratory, measure it, weigh it, it doesn't
If they are capable of
exist.
coming to Earth, they're more advanced than us. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Then why are they using these very simple medical probes? Surely they have very
We don't know what they're looking for. We don't know what they're doing. Perhaps they're just interested.
All your tests demonstrate is that they believe they're telling the truth.
In
And
case you
actually,
think...
you've simply used GSR and blood pressure. You haven't used EEG.
No.
You've just done a three-way lie detector test. You haven't done a full
Four-way, but yes, indeed.
So,
They
but
believe that they're telling
the truth.
They believe that they're telling
There's
the
a very
truth.
big difference between saying that actually that's what happened to them.
No. I'm saying that they are telling the truth.
Okay.
As they believe it.
Now, we've been reading reports about them, but
I
not...
have done a lot of other people who believe it too.
Not everyone rushes into print with these stories. We have Rachel with us here tonight, but she is so afraid of being ridiculed that she is asked to remain anonymous, and so she appears in silhouette. Rachel, you tell us that you had more than one encounter with aliens. What happened the first time?
Well, it was under hypnotic regression that I found out that I had been abducted when I was 4 years old. And it was during this abduction that I had something stuck up my nose. And to me, I just felt like I was in a medical, you know, like a hospital or something. As I grew up, I didn't have any real memory of it. And I remember touching these lights, you know, sort of like I guess you could say it was like an intelligence sort of test. I was just touching these lights as a child. But I had it was not until Tony had me regressed until I was 4 that I realized I had been abducted at 4 years old.
And what happened the next time?
Well, the memory that I have was when I was 14 and again at 24, but 24 I had more physical evidence of the abduction than the one at 14. At 24, I remember waking up and seeing this bright light and going to the window and then you know, feeling dozy and then waking up the next morning and having this hole in my navel and this sort of clear liquid draining out my navel, and it had been really sore, like some sort of infection. And when I went to the doctor about it, which was the military doctor, because my ex-husband at the time was in the military.
Yeah, what did he say?
They were puzzled because they didn't know what had caused it. They didn't have any, their reaction was rather odd for doctors, I would say. But all they gave me was an antibiotic, and they just asked me, you know, what caused it, where did it happen. I couldn't give them an answer because I didn't know.
Rachel, thank you for sharing your story with us tonight. John Chesney, aren't psychologists like you in danger of attempting to explain this away when it may be you who is wrong and not them?
Quite right. It could be absolutely true, David. It could be entirely true. But what I'm here to do is to put the opposite point of view across. Who knows who's true in this case? We don't know. Until they beam down right here and land on the set and talk to us, we've no idea. But it seems to me from what you said tonight that actually the most likely explanation is that it's in the mind.
Right. Both Rachel and Maria gave evidence under hypnosis. John Spencer, is this kind of evidence under hypnosis something that we should be taking seriously?
Under hypnosis, perhaps not. I want to say from the start, though, that all of the work we've done, for several reasons that we haven't even touched on here, indicates that these people and people like them have genuine experiences, real experiences, not products of fantasy. But that said, the hypnosis side of that, we tested that specifically in groups I've worked with, and it is unreliable. What it does, rather like a lie detector test, it produces what the person believes and not what is objectively real. We did experiments where we took not subjects, not genuine subjects, but volunteers working with us, to give them a particular type of memory, take them into regression hypnosis, and then try and distort their memory deliberately. And we did it in the end, not even using words. We could do it with eye contact.
But
alone.
surely, finding yourself floating above your own house, is that something that we should be taking seriously?
Common experience. Ask any teenager who's gone through puberty. Many will tell you about the same experience.
Looking into this, you have to look into the sort of abilities of the right brain and the so-called paranormal. Many of the people experiencing these things will tell you there are paranormal incidents as well, and that includes things like psychogenic purpura, which produces stigmata. It's still as near as paranormal as you want, and yet that one you can see in your hands.
Is there anyone here in the audience that's been convinced by what they've heard tonight, the evidence from the women? Not so much. Michael Soper, would any of this evidence stand up in court?
In the UFO movement, we have a very great difficulty, and that is that we have about 80,000 cases. We have a considerable number of cases at Contact International, particularly. We have at least 1,600 abduction reports. We have probably 3 days of video films. We have uncounted number of periodicals and so forth. And we get a very short time like this on air to actually express it all. It's very difficult to do. There's several points. I think yes, if we could express and explain and present all our evidence, it would convince, to use the legal phrase, the man on the Clapham omnibus. And may I say about this question of aliens, which is always a very difficult word, that what we really mean is non-human intelligent entities.
Right. Tony Dodd, you've been saying that the people that have had these visitations and these examinations actually have things implanted in their heads. What's the significance of that?
Yes, that's just part of the syndrome. I mean, there's many things. There's taking Maria's case and others that I've dealt with, where there's hair removed from the back of the head in a circle, and it's removed at the roots.
Maria mentioned that earlier.
That's another common thing that happens.
Pulled out?
It's at the root follicles are actually removed, and it's in a circle, probably the size of a 5p piece.
Maria,
precisely.
why don't you have a conventional surgical examination now, and let's have it out. Let's see exactly what they put in your nose, if indeed that's what you're claiming.
Well,
you told us that you felt something. You know.
If there's something there, then I would be willing to see if it's still there or if it isn't there or what it is.
I bet it isn't. Fred, you still don't buy this. You're unconvinced.
Completely unconvinced.
I think we're actually missing the point. The point is that whether, and I do perfectly believe that the experience I had was genuine, and I've never actually said aliens. I have had interaction with something that is non-human. I've never actually said alien specimen. I don't know where they come from, and I don't know who they are or what they are. The trauma that I had following meeting those was genuine.
Yes,
and the fact of the matter is, we should be trying to investigate the trauma that people like myself go through, whether it is fantasy, whether it's psychological, whether it's genuine or not. The fact of the matter is, it's the trauma that is important.
I entirely agree with that, and we need to find a way of helping people like you who are traumatised
that isn't
still.
available in this country.
Gene Holding and Millie.
Minds open enough to accept that there are things that we don't understand. There are people who are developing faster than we are. If a Battle of Britain pilot had been shown a Harrier jump jet, they couldn't have believed it, and in undeveloped parts of the world, they don't believe the things that we do.
But we do have a couple of witnesses here who are willing to tell their story too. Now, did you actually see aliens?
Yes, not aliens, but we saw the craft. We were taking our dogs for a walk, and when we got halfway down the hill, we saw these bright lights, green and red, and it was hovering and circling around. It came right down to the bottom of the hill, and then it came up parallel with the street that we were in, and we could see it going through the houses. So we turned round and we ran in that direction. We got to the top of the street, and there it was, level with the tops of the roof of the technical college. It was as big as 4 double-decker buses, and the lights were fluctuating on and off, more green than red, and we could actually see the windows. But because it was 9:45 at night, we couldn't see in, but we could see the dome, and we stood and watched it for 6 minutes.
And when did this happen?
This happened in August last year.
And you've spent most of the time trying to convince people, or have you just given up?
No, we didn't want to come out into the open, and then all of a sudden I thought to myself, why hide what we saw? Because we saw it, didn't we, Millie?
There was also a big white ball in the sky with mist around it.
Yeah,
and when this tipped up and went, it went up to this white ball, and that went with it.
Sane, rational-sounding people. Fred, you dispute what they saw too?
I would like to have seen it because I think I could have probably, I think I probably could have explained it. I was out, and I think I actually.
Fred wants to try to explain. How do you explain away a huge object flashing away in the sky? And it's not an airplane.
It could well be an airplane. There was a report in Stockport near where I live a bit ago.
They're saying it was round and looked like the conventional flying saucer.
We had exactly that in Stockport a few weeks ago. It was a garage opened up and it had a searchlight, and it was going round the sky. And people from miles around were phoning up saying, this oval object.
It was only 50 feet off the road.
Albert Budden, could there be another explanation for all this?
Well, sorry. Yeah, I'd just like to carry on from this slightly. 95% of promising UFO sightings turn out to be mundane objects seen under unusual conditions. I think this is one of these IFOs, identified flying objects. I've been looking into abductions and contactees for the past 14 months, and my conclusions are that all contactees and all abductees are suffering from a well-defined medical condition called electrical hypersensitivity and multiple allergy.
Which means what?
Which means that they are suffering from electronic pollution. If you look at where these people live, they are living in electromagnetic hotspots which produce physical effects on their bodies and sensitize their nervous systems.
But Albert, haven't there have been sightings of UFOs for hundreds of years?
Yeah, they're natural phenomena. They come out as big globes of electrical energy that come out of the ground at fault lines.
Well, there's another explanation for it. I want to come back to you, Maria, and ask you if it worries you that so many people, after these years and the examinations and the testimony you've given, does it worry you that so many people would appear to disbelieve you?
No, it doesn't actually, because everybody's entitled to their own opinion, their own belief, and I know that what I say is actually asking them to stretch their own belief system a step further. But by the same token, the only reason really that I myself came forward is, as I said before, is because there are many hundreds of people who are extremely frightened and live isolated. And it doesn't bother me if nobody believes me, no, because I believe me and I know what I experienced. And I'd just like to make a point actually to John Spencer that although some of my memories have actually surfaced during regression, the majority of them have actually been conscious recall that I've had since childhood.
What does your husband make of all this? Tony, what do you say? What was your reaction when you came home and you heard what was obviously a fantastic story?
I've got an open mind and I believe everything she says. She's never lied to me, to my knowledge.
Did you have any inkling that there may be visitors from outer space before that? Were you skeptical?
No. So I've got an open mind though, and I can accept it. And I've seen many things since. And she's had other experiences other than this, which also corroborate it.
Thank you both. Thank you everyone for taking part.